Story 1. Signs on Mount Silence. I've always loved the mountains. There's something about the air up there, thin, sharp, clean, that makes the rest of the world feel far away, like the noise and pressure of everyday life can't reach you once you're high enough. Maybe that's why I agreed to the trip in the first place. Maybe that's why I ignored the signs, the gut feeling, the quiet things that didn't sit right from the moment we started planning. It was late September when we set out. Me, Rachel, and Marcus. We'd all been friends since college, the kind of tight-knit trio that had survived group projects, messy breakups, and hangovers so bad they felt like near-death experiences. This was supposed to be our big reset trip, a weekend hike to clear our heads, reconnect with nature, and come back refreshed. You know, the kind of wholesome adventure that looks good on Instagram. We chose Mount Silence because of the name. Rachel had found it on some obscure hiking blog, buried beneath trip reports about more popular peaks. Mount Silence, she'd said with a grin, holding up her phone. Sounds dramatic, right? Total isolation, barely any foot traffic, and supposedly some of the best views in the state. Plus, it's only a couple hours from town. Marcus had nodded immediately, always up for anything that didn't involve phone service. I'd hesitated, something about the name felt off. Not ominous, exactly, just heavy. Like it carried history, maybe even sorrow. But I didn't say anything. I just smiled and said I was in. We left early on a Friday morning, our backpacks stuffed and our spirits high. The drive was long and winding, taking us deeper into a part of the country none of us had explored before. We passed through a few quiet towns, places with shuttered gas stations and hand-painted signs, towns where the only thing moving was the wind through the trees. Each mile we traveled, the cell signal dropped lower until our phones were nothing more than digital paperweights. By the time we reached the trailhead, the sun was hanging low in the sky. The parking lot was empty. No other cars, no park ranger kiosk, no trail maps. Just a weathered wooden sign nailed to a post that said Mount Silence, Trail, in faded red letters. I remember standing there, one hand on the strap of my backpack, looking at that sign and feeling a strange chill. Not from the weather, but from something I couldn't explain. The kind of chill that crawls up your spine and whispers, "Turn back." Of course, I didn't say anything. I didn't want to be that guy, the one who spooked easy. So instead, I smiled and said, "Looks like we've got the whole mountain to ourselves." Rachel grinned. "Perfect." Marcus hoisted his bag. "Let's make some memories." And just like that, we started up the trail. The first part of the hike was beautiful, honestly. Golden sunlight filtered through tall pine trees, casting long shadows across the forest floor. The air smelled like damp earth and fallen leaves. We laughed, joked, took photos. The trail wasn't marked very well, but it was visible enough to follow. Just a narrow dirt path winding between trees, sometimes swallowed by underbrush, but always reappearing just ahead. After maybe an hour, we stopped for a break near a clearing. I remember Rachel pulling out a protein bar and offering it to a chipmunk that darted across a log. Marcus was already snapping photos with his old-school film camera. He loved the analog feel, said it made moments feel more real. That's when we first heard it. A soft sound, just barely audible over the rustling of the trees. A kind of low hum, like a vibration buried beneath the soil. We all stopped talking at once. I looked at the others, and they looked at me. "Do you hear that?" I asked. Rachel tilted her head. "It's like buzzing." Marcus frowned and knelt, placing a hand on the ground. "It's probably water. Maybe a stream underground or something." But when I knelt too, I didn't just hear it, I felt it. A faint, rhythmic pulsing in the earth. Like something deep below was moving, slowly, steadily. Almost like a heartbeat. I stood up quickly and laughed it off. Weird. Must be nothing. And we moved on. The further we hiked, the quieter the forest became. No birds, no insects. Even the wind seemed to hush itself as we climbed higher. It was the kind of silence that didn't feel peaceful. It felt expectant, like the woods were holding their breath. At one point, Marcus pulled ahead and shouted, "Hey, I think there's a shortcut up this ridge." He was pointing at a narrow, steeper path that looked like it had once been a trail but hadn't been used in years. It was overgrown and rocky, but it did angle toward where our map claimed the plateau should be. Rachel squinted at it. "Looks sketchy." "Come on," Marcus said, already halfway up. "We'll save half an hour, easy." I exchanged a look with Rachel, who sighed and started climbing after him. I hesitated one more time. There were markings on some of the trees nearby, faint, almost completely worn away. They looked like symbols or maybe old forestry notches, but they didn't match any trail markers I'd seen before. Just strange, looping etchings that made me uneasy. Still, I followed. As we climbed that shortcut path, something strange began to happen. The sunlight started to change. I don't mean the time of day, I mean the actual quality of the light. It became warmer, but not in a comforting way. It was too gold, too thick, almost like syrup in the air. The trees began to lean in slightly, their branches tangled and reaching downward. The ground felt softer, spongy, like it hadn't seen solid sunlight in decades. That low hum returned, stronger now. I stopped and looked behind me. The forest behind us looked different, like we had crossed some invisible threshold. The trees were denser. The air was still. The trail we had just climbed now seemed darker, almost like it was disappearing. And then Rachel whispered, "Do you smell that?" It hit me all at once. A sudden odor that didn't belong in any forest. A mix of old paper, mildew, and wet fur. It came in a wave, thick and sudden. Marcus coughed and pulled his shirt over his nose. "What the hell is that?" he asked. No one answered. We stood there for a moment, surrounded by silence, the three of us suddenly unsure of why we'd come. A bird flapped violently out of a nearby bush, startling all of us, and the moment passed. The smell faded just as quickly as it had come, and the path ahead opened up into a more level stretch. "Let's keep going," I said, though I didn't feel confident. Not anymore. Something had changed. I didn't know it yet, but that moment, standing on that overgrown shortcut trail with that awful smell in my nose and the sound of the earth throbbing beneath my feet, that was the real beginning of our nightmare. Because after that point, we stopped being alone on Mount Silence. The path we followed after that strange shortcut started to feel less like a trail and more like something made accidentally, or worse, intentionally forgotten. The ground was uneven, twisted with exposed roots, and the trees arched overhead like a tunnel of bones. That hum beneath the dirt, still there, quieter now, but constant, like the earth had a pulse. I tried to focus on my breathing, on the crunch of dried leaves beneath my boots, anything to drown out the growing unease. Marcus walked ahead, humming softly to himself, an old tune I didn't recognize. Rachel was in the middle, silent, eyes darting between the trees. Then we started seeing them. It began with a shimmer, just barely visible. At first, I thought it was heat haze, like the kind you see rising off asphalt in the summer. But we were nearly 6,000 feet up, and the temperature had dropped sharply. The shimmering wasn't coming from the air. It was the space itself, as if certain parts of the woods were glitching, like a bad signal on an old TV. "Do you guys see that?" I asked. Rachel nodded slowly, still walking. "It's like the trees aren't lining up right." I turned and stared at the forest behind us. Sure enough, when I looked out of the corner of my eye, I'd catch the shimmer again. But the second I turned my head to look directly at it, it vanished. Marcus laughed uneasily. "You're both freaking yourselves out. It's just light through the trees. The sun's lower now, it plays tricks." But even he didn't sound convinced. We kept climbing, following the trail as it narrowed into a rocky slope. That's when we came to a small stream cutting across the path. It should have been ordinary, just water flowing over smooth stones. But when I looked closer, something was wrong. The rocks beneath the surface were slick, covered in a strange, oily sheen that shimmered rainbow colors when the sunlight hit it just right. I crouched down, squinting. "Guys, come check this out." Marcus and Rachel doubled back to where I was kneeling by the water. "What is that?" Marcus muttered. Rachel frowned. "That's not natural. I've never seen algae like that. It looks synthetic." I dipped a stick into the stream and stirred. The rainbow sheen separated and then slowly pulled back together, like it was alive. The water didn't bubble or smell strange, but it felt wrong, like it was holding a secret. We stared at it for a while, no one saying anything. Finally, Rachel stood up. "Let's keep moving. It's getting late." We pressed on, but that stream stuck with me. The way the surface rippled against the current, like it was resisting. As we continued our climb, the forest began to change again. The trees became more twisted, their bark blackened and cracked like burned wood. The branches stretched low and wide, reaching out across the trail like long, crooked fingers. The sunlight barely made it through the canopy now. The air grew colder, wetter, heavier. Then came the smell. It hit all at once, like someone had lit a moldy library carpet on fire. A mix of old paper, wet dog, and something almost rotten, like meat that had been left out in the sun. Rachel gagged. Marcus covered his mouth. I turned in a slow circle. Where's it coming from? But there was no source. No animal carcass, no dead vegetation. It just hung in the air, clinging to our clothes and skin. I could feel it settling in my hair, behind my eyes. As we climbed higher, everything alive seemed to vanish. No squirrels, no birds, not even insects. The forest had gone completely still. And that silence wasn't peaceful, it was predatory. We heard only the wind, our footsteps, and sometimes a second set of footsteps that never matched our pace. We stopped talking after a while. Even Marcus, the eternal chatterbox, had gone quiet. His camera swung uselessly from his shoulder. Rachel kept glancing behind us, her eyes sharp and wide. We should have reached the plateau by now, she said finally. We're close, I lied. I didn't want to admit that the trail didn't match the map anymore. Landmarks we should have passed were missing. It was like the mountain had shifted beneath us. Even my watch had stopped, frozen at 3:33 p.m. I hadn't noticed it until that moment, and when I pointed it out, Marcus said his was the same. I swear it was working when we started, he murmured, fiddling with the buttons. We finally reached the plateau just before dusk. The trail opened into a wide, flat area that didn't feel natural at all. The ground was too even, like it had been pressed flat by something massive. A thin mist hugged the ground, swirling at our ankles like smoke from a dying fire. This doesn't look like a plateau, Rachel said. It looks artificial. We were too tired to question it. Marcus started unpacking his tent without a word. Rachel followed. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the fog creeping along the edge of the clearing, listening to the wind that had started to whisper again. There were no stars visible above us, only a low-hanging gray sky that seemed closer than it should have been. That's when I noticed something about the soil beneath my boots. It was soft, too soft, like something hollow was underneath. I crouched and pressed my hand to the earth. Vibration, faint, subtle, but definitely there. Not the mountain, not the wind, not even water. Something moving somewhere beneath us. I swallowed hard and called out, "Guys, come here. Feel this." Rachel and Marcus came over. I pointed at the ground. We each placed our hands down, side by side, silent. No one said a word. The sun slipped behind the trees. The mist thickened, and all I could think was, we weren't alone on this mountain, and whatever was here wasn't sleeping. The three of us stood there for a long time, hands pressed to the cool, trembling earth. None of us spoke, because none of us could explain it. Not without sounding crazy, but we all felt it. Something alive beneath us, deep in the mountain, like a heartbeat buried under layers of dirt and time. Rachel finally pulled her hand away. We shouldn't stay here. Marcus nodded, his face pale in the fading light. Yeah, but where else can we go? We're already miles off any official trail. It'll be pitch black in 20 minutes. He wasn't wrong. The fog was thickening, curling around our legs like fingers. The trees at the edge of the clearing were nothing but dark silhouettes now, tall, narrow, and crooked like they'd grown in agony. Let's just set up camp, I said quietly. We'll leave at first light. No one argued. We went about our routine, pitching tents, lighting the little camp stove, heating up some dehydrated meals. But the usual rhythm was missing. We weren't laughing, or joking, or even talking much at all. We moved like ghosts, going through motions we'd done 100 times before. Only this time it felt like a ritual, like we were trying to ward something off. As I hammered in the last stake of my tent, I hit another soft patch of earth. The stake sank in with almost no resistance, like punching through foam. I stopped, wiped my hand across my forehead, and bent down to feel it again. Same vibration, same low, steady pulse, like a distant drumbeat. I looked up and noticed something else. The mist was thicker now, especially near the edge of the clearing. It clung to the tree line, refusing to go further, like it was watching us. Every so often, it would shift, just slightly, and for a split second, I thought I saw movement inside it. Something tall, something slow. But when I blinked, it was gone. We gathered around the tiny flicker of our fire, the heat barely cutting through the chill that had settled in. This isn't right, Rachel muttered, stirring her food. I've camped in cold weather before, but this feels wrong. I keep hearing things, Marcus added. Not animals. Not wind. Just movement. I didn't say anything. I'd heard it too. After we ate, Rachel turned in first. Marcus followed not long after, zipping himself into his sleeping bag like a kid hiding from monsters. I stayed up. I told them I'd take first watch, but the truth was, I couldn't sleep. Not here. Not with that smell still lingering in the air. Not with that vibration humming under our campsite like a slow, ancient warning. I sat next to the dying fire, flashlight in hand, watching the fog. It was still gathered along the edge of the trees like a waiting crowd. Now and then it would swirl, not with the wind, but as if something was moving inside it, dragging it along. The pulse beneath the ground had grown stronger, or maybe I was just more aware of it now. It wasn't painful, just constant, like it was trying to sync with my heartbeat. And then I heard it, a sound so faint I thought I imagined it. Thump, thump, thump. I held my breath and waited. There it was again, like a heartbeat heard through a stethoscope. Slow, steady, but not mine. I stood up slowly, sweeping my flashlight toward the trees. Nothing, just fog and shadows. But the sound, it was coming from everywhere at once. Not just through the air, but up from the ground. I whispered, Rachel? Marcus? No answer. Their tents were zipped tight, untouched. Then the fog moved. Not from wind. It coiled inward, sliding across the ground like it was being drawn by something. And then, I saw a figure, barely visible, just on the edge of the clearing. Human-shaped. Standing still. I pointed my flashlight directly at it, and it vanished. My breath caught in my throat. Thump, thump, thump. The sound was louder now. The ground beneath me vibrated in rhythm with it. The tents rustled softly. I turned toward Rachel's tent. Rachel, get up. Something's happening. I unzipped the flap and aimed my light inside. Empty. Her sleeping bag was perfectly made, like no one had ever been inside. Panic hit me like ice water. I scrambled to Marcus's tent. Same thing. Empty. Neat. Untouched. It was like they'd never been there at all. I backed away, heart slamming against my ribs. Rachel. Marcus. Nothing. Then the fog surged forward. It hit me like a wave, cold and wet and full of whispers. Not words. Just breath. Sounds. Shapes flickered in the mist. Arms, legs, faces, all shifting, never clear. I stumbled back toward the fire, but it had gone out. Just glowing coals remained. The thumping was everywhere now, like the mountain itself had a heartbeat and it was racing. And then, silence. The fog stopped moving. The vibration stopped. The sound cut off like someone had flipped a switch. I stood there in total stillness, shaking. Then I saw it. At the edge of the clearing, in the exact spot where the fog had gathered deepest, the trees had bent inward, forming a circle, like something had pushed them outward from the inside, like a door had been opened. But there was nothing there now, just silence, and the realization that I was completely alone. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen in the cold breath of that mountain. Maybe minutes, maybe longer. My mind couldn't make sense of what had just happened. 1 second, my friends were sleeping in their tents. The next, they were just gone. No signs of a struggle. No footprints. No sound of running. Just empty sleeping bags and a campsite that looked untouched. Like we'd never been there at all. I called their names again, louder this time. My voice echoed off the trees and died in the mist. I strained to hear anything. Breathing, footsteps, laughter. But all I got was the low rustle of fog curling around my legs and the distant, hollow silence that came after something unseen had passed. I grabbed my flashlight and started circling the clearing. My hands were shaking so hard the beam jumped all over the place. The tents were intact. The food was untouched. Rachel's jacket still hung from a tree branch where she'd left it to dry. Everything was exactly as it had been. Except for them. Except for the pulse that had vanished as quickly as it came. Except for the fact that now, I was alone. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I sat on a cold rock near the edge of the clearing, flashlight in one hand, bear spray in the other, staring into the mist like it would reach out and take me next. At some point, maybe 4 or 5 in the morning, the fog began to retreat. Slowly, like it was slipping away back into the trees. And the forest started to change. The smell of mildew and rot faded. The pressure in the air lifted. Birds began to chirp in the distance like someone had finally turned the world back on. But my friends were still gone. The second the sun began to creep over the treetops, I made my decision. I couldn't stay. Not alone. Not after that. I left a note in the center of our camp, wrote their names, the date, the time I last saw them. I told them I'd gone to get help, that I'd be back, even though part of me already knew I wouldn't be. I packed only what I needed, water, my phone, my knife, and left everything else behind. Every step down the mountain felt like walking out of a dream that had nearly killed me. But the strangest part? Everything was normal. No shimmering trails, no strange fog, no oily rainbow film in the streams. The moss had stopped pulsing. The birds were back. It was like the mountain had swallowed the nightmare and spit out a pretty postcard again. And yet, I could still feel something watching me. I didn't stop moving. I hiked harder and faster than I ever had before, knees aching, throat burning. The trail stretched longer than I remembered. The switchbacks were endless, and the forest seemed to crowd in tighter with every turn. But I didn't stop. I didn't dare. By the time I stumbled out of the tree lean and saw the green roof of the ranger station, my legs gave out. I collapsed right there in the gravel parking lot. A couple of rangers rushed over, shouting my name, but I couldn't speak. I just pointed back at the woods and whispered, "They're gone." They gave me water, wrapped me in a blanket, and radioed for help. I finally told them everything about the trail, the mist, the heartbeat in the ground, the shapes in the fog, about Rachel and Marcus disappearing without a sound. I didn't care if they believed me. I just needed them to go look. Search teams were sent up by noon. Professional rescue crews with dogs and heat sensors, helicopters circling above. They checked every inch of Mount Silence, every ridge, every hollow, every hidden ravine. They found the campsite. Tents still pitched, gear still in place. No signs of a struggle, no footprints but mine. The note I left was still there, unmoved, dry despite the night's mist. But Rachel and Marcus? Gone. Completely. As if they had walked into the fog and been erased. They questioned me for hours. They combed through my phone's GPS data. They checked the soil, the water, the weather. All of it came back normal. Nothing strange. Nothing dangerous. No evidence that anything had happened at all. The official report listed them as missing, presumed dead. They guessed maybe they got disoriented in the dark, wandered off, and fell from one of the cliffs. But I know better. I was there. I saw the fog shift. I heard the ground breathe. I felt that mountain heartbeat in my bones. And I'll never forget that moment when I opened their tents and realized I was the only one left. Weeks passed, then months. I stayed in touch with the search teams at first, but they stopped calling eventually. There was nothing new to report, nothing new to find. People moved on. I didn't. Back home, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house at night made my skin crawl. I'd wake up convinced the fog was seeping under the door, that something was in the hallway, watching me. Sometimes, when it's quiet, I still hear that sound. Thump, 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 faint, like a drum in the distance, or a heartbeat under the earth. And I wonder, what would have happened if I hadn't stayed up that night? If I'd fallen asleep like the others, would I have vanished too? Would I be gone now, erased from the world like I never existed? Story 2. The Missing Kids of Camp Evergreen. I still remember the day the email showed up. It came out of nowhere. No header, no sender name I recognized. Just a subject line that read, "Help requested. Camp Evergreen maintenance assistance needed. Urgent." At first, I thought it was spam. Who sends out work requests to random Boy Scout troops without a name or an official letterhead? But the message was strangely specific. It mentioned our troop by name, even listed our county and last year's community service project. The request? A weekend trip to help restore and inspect an old climbing tower at a place called Camp Evergreen. A free overnight camping trip, meals provided, plus the hours would count toward our scout leadership requirements. Sounded like a win, except for the fact that none of us had ever heard of Camp Evergreen. Still, I was 16, restless, curious, and always up for an excuse to get out into the woods. I pitched the idea to my scoutmaster, Mr. Hendrick, who was always down for a rustic getaway. He was a tough guy, old-school military, not the kind who scares easily. He raised an eyebrow when I showed him the email, but eventually nodded and said, "Hell, why not? Could be some old vets camp looking for help." By the next weekend, we had our crew lined up. Me, Daniel, my best friend Oliver, the hyperactive twins Jack and Michael, and Mr. Hendrick driving us in his rusty old Suburban that smelled like burnt coffee and pine air freshener. The email had attached a digital map with vague directions and a single note at the bottom. No cell reception past Fire Road 9. Use the handwritten note tacked to the back office for final trail directions. That last line gave me pause. What handwritten note? Tacked where? It sounded like the setup for a horror movie, but we laughed it off. The drive out to the forest took hours. The farther we got from town, the worse the roads became. Paved gave way to gravel, gravel gave way to dirt, and eventually, dirt turned into a single narrow trail with brush clawing at the sides of the vehicle. The forest around us thickened, towering evergreens leaning in close like they were trying to keep secrets from the sky. No birds, no bugs, just the crunch of tires on dried leaves and the distant creak of old branches. We finally pulled up to what must have once been the main office of Camp Evergreen. The building looked like it hadn't been used in decades. Paint peeled from the wooden siding, and one of the windows was boarded shut with warped planks. There was no welcome sign, no caretaker, just silence, and that building, hunched and sagging like it wanted to be left alone. "Are you sure this is the place?" Oliver asked, peering out the window. His usual sarcastic tone was gone. I nodded slowly. "This is where the GPS cut out. Said we're here." We stepped out of the car, the forest pressing in all around us. The air had that sticky late summer weight to it, mixed with something stale. The kind of smell you get in attics or basements that haven't been opened in years. Mr. Hendrick led us around the back of the office. And sure enough, there it was. A piece of yellowed paper, nailed into the wall with an old rusted tack, flapping gently in the breeze like it had been waiting for someone to come find it. It simply read, "Cabin route, East Trail. Follow stream bed for 1.2 miles. Watch for split oak. Camp is just beyond." That was it. No signature, no date, no welcome message. Just faded handwriting, shaky and uneven, like someone had written it in a hurry. None of us spoke for a moment. Then Jack let out a laugh. "Man, this place is sketchy. I love it." The rest of us weren't quite so sure. Still, we were already out here, miles from anywhere. No signal, no backup, no turning back. So, we slung on our packs, grabbed our gear, and started down the trail. It was hot, miserably hot. The stream bed was barely a trickle, more moss and rocks than water, and we had to bushwhack through overgrown shrubs that clawed at our ankles. The hike felt endless, more than the 1.2 miles the note claimed. By the time we reached the split oak, and yeah, it really was split, like something had driven an axe straight down the middle, we were drenched in sweat and just about ready to collapse. The cabins appeared out of nowhere. I mean it. One minute we were in dense forest. The next we stumbled into a clearing with 5 old structures spaced in a half moon around a fire pit. The wood was weathered gray, roofs sagging, windows either fogged up or boarded over. No lights, no footprints, just stillness. We dropped our packs and stood in silence, taking it all in. "This place gives me the creeps," Michael muttered. The worst part? The climbing tower. It stood on the far end of the clearing, tall, skeletal, and rotting. Easily 50 feet high, it looked like it had been cobbled together out of scrap lumber and blind faith. Ropes dangled from the top, frayed and darkened with age. Some planks looked soft as sponge. A breeze picked up, and the tower groaned, slow and hollow, like a dying animal breathing through wood. And I swear to God, I had this weird feeling, like something was up there, watching us. I turned to look, but there was nothing. Just the tower, just the wind, just a long, quiet weekend ahead. We were supposed to be here to fix that thing. None of us knew that what we were really about to do was uncover something that should have stayed buried forever. That first night at Camp Evergreen didn't go the way any of us expected. We'd barely finished setting up our sleeping bags and popping open some canned chili when the sun dipped behind the trees like it was running from something. One moment we had daylight. The next, we were swallowed by shadows. Out there, deep in the woods, the dark comes fast and hard, and it doesn't let go easy. We didn't even bother with the cabins. They looked too unstable, and honestly, something about the way they leaned in on themselves felt off, like they were listening. So we stayed close to the fire pit. Mr. Hendrick got the flames going, and we circled up, our flashlights laid out within arm's reach. The fire crackled loud in the still air, and for a while, the warmth gave us some comfort. We joked around, shared stories from previous hikes, and tried to ignore the uneasy way the forest just didn't sound right. No crickets, no owls, no rustling, just firewood popping, and silence pressing in from the trees like a heavy coat. Eventually, around midnight, we started drifting off. One by one, the guys crawled into their tents. I took the last watch, partly out of habit, partly because something in my gut told me not to sleep just yet. I sat there, poking at the fire with a stick, listening. That's when I heard it. At first, it was soft, like someone shifting their weight on wooden boards. I figured maybe one of the twins had gotten up to pee. But when I looked around, all the tents were zipped shut. Then I heard it again, louder this time. Creak. It came from the direction of the climbing tower. I stood up slowly, grabbed my flashlight, and pointed it across the clearing. The tower stood tall and broken, silhouetted by moonlight. Nothing moved. But the feeling I'd had earlier, the sensation of being watched from above, rushed back so hard it nearly knocked the breath out of me. I took a step toward it. Then I heard something else. Whispering. I froze. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the trees. It was voices. Low. Quiet. Like a group of people talking just out of earshot. Words just on the edge of understanding. I swept the beam of my flashlight over the base of the tower, through the trees, even behind me. Nothing. Then something brushed past my shoulder. I spun around, heart slamming in my chest, but no one was there. The fire crackled behind me, tents still zipped shut. I turned back to the tower, and that's when I heard it. A whisper, right beside my ear. They said the ropes would keep us safe. My blood went ice cold. I stumbled back, heart racing, flashlight shaking in my hand. The whisper had been right there. Not distant. Not imagined. Right. There. I backed away from the tower, keeping my light on it the whole time. A shape moved behind the top platform. Just a flicker, like someone ducking out of view. But there was no ladder anymore. No way up. That section had rotted off years ago, from the looks of it. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the fire until dawn broke over the trees. The next morning, I told the others what I heard. They didn't laugh. Not this time. In fact, Jack admitted that he'd woken up during the night and heard something, too. Not footsteps. Breathing. Right outside his tent. Michael said he'd had a dream. No, not a dream. A nightmare. That he was climbing the tower, only it was different. Taller. Shifting under him. And someone, or something, was waiting at the top. He wouldn't say what it looked like. He just kept shaking his head and muttering. It had no face. That afternoon, we were supposed to start clearing the tower. Clear brush. Assess the support beams. Maybe do some minor repairs. But none of us wanted to go near it. Still, we were scouts. We had a job to do. So we split up. Oliver and the twins went to clear the grounds and trails, while I stayed with Mr. Hendrick to inspect the inside of the tower. The moment I stepped through the warped doorway, the air changed. It was colder inside. Damp. The smell hit me instantly. Mildew, wet wood, and something else. Something metallic. Almost like rust. Or old blood. The walls were streaked with water damage, and in the far corner, half covered by a tarp, was a filing cabinet. It looked completely out of place, like someone had dragged it here from an office and left it to rot. On the front, in faded red marker, were the words, "Permission slips, 1997. I looked at Mr. Hendrick. Why would this still be here? He frowned, wiping dust from the top and jiggling the handle. It opened with a screech. Inside were folders. Dozens of them. Campers' names, dates, emergency contacts. Some even had drawings, stick figures, sloppy handwriting, kids' dreams of adventure and fun. But as I flipped through them, something stuck out. The same name appeared more than once. Tommy Martin. Different years. Different handwriting. And then I saw the note. It was crumpled, shoved to the back, barely legible. But the handwriting was fast, panicked. "Mike, we've got to cover this up. The Martin kids' parents are out for blood. If they find out he didn't have a signed form, we're screwed. Destroy the evidence. It's the only way to save our skins." No signature, just the name Thompson at the bottom. I turned to show Mr. Hendrick, but before I could say a word, we heard it. A groan. Not from the wind. Not from the trees. From the tower itself. The whole place began to creak and shudder, as if the wood was shifting beneath us. Boards above started to rattle. Dust rained down. And then, somewhere above us, a loud, sickening thud, followed by the sound of a rope sliding through a pulley. We ran. We didn't stop to check. Didn't speak. We just sprinted into the clearing, shouting for the others. When we turned back, expecting to see the tower falling apart behind us, it looked exactly the same. Silent. Still. Unchanged. But I knew what I heard. I knew what that whisper meant. They said the ropes would keep us safe. And now, I was starting to think someone, maybe a child, had believed that once, and died because of it. We didn't speak much for the rest of the day. Something about what happened inside the tower, how the whole structure seemed to groan under its own history, left us all shaken. Even Mr. Hendrick, who'd always been calm and composed, seemed rattled. He kept pacing, glancing at the woods like he was waiting for something else to show itself. That night, none of us volunteered to keep watch. We all just quietly zipped ourselves into our tents, flashlights clutched tight in our hands. But even with our eyes closed, we couldn't escape it. The memory of the whisper, the groan of splintering wood, and that sickening thud echoing in our ears like it was still happening. Around 2 a.m., I woke up sweating. At first, I thought it was a dream, but the tent felt ice cold, and I realized I wasn't alone. Someone, or something, was outside. I didn't hear footsteps. It was quieter than that, but I could sense it. A presence, a heavy, pressing stillness, like the air itself was holding its breath. And then came the sound, not breathing, not whispering, scratching, right against the canvas of my tent. Slow, deliberate, clawing at the fabric just above my head. I didn't dare move. I didn't even breathe. Then I heard the voice, a child's voice, right outside my tent, no more than a foot from my ear. Please help me. I fell. I can't get back up. The words were barely more than a whisper, dry and cracked, like the speaker hadn't drawn a full breath in years. I bolted upright, fumbling for my flashlight. But the second I flicked it on, silence. I tore open the tent flap. Nothing. The fire pit was dark and cold. The other tents were zipped shut. No footprints. No broken branches. Just the trees and the tower standing tall like a grave marker. I stayed up the rest of the night, flashlight in one hand, that crumpled note from the cabinet in the other. Something about the way Tommy Martin kept appearing again and again in the records was eating at me. The next morning, I told the others what I'd heard. Michael turned pale. He'd had a dream, he said. A vivid one. He was back in the tower, but this time, he wasn't climbing it. He was falling, endlessly falling, while voices whispered all around him. It's your turn. It's always your turn. We were supposed to spend that day clearing out the last of the vines and brush choking the base of the tower. But none of us wanted to get close to it again. Still, we had a job to do. Jack and Michael were cutting through some overgrowth when Jack tripped over something half buried in the dirt. At first, he thought it was just a chunk of old wood, but when he brushed it off, it wasn't just a beam. It was a support strut from the tower, charred black on one side. But that's not what froze us in place. It was what was carved into it. Shallow, frantic gouges, etched by something sharp or desperate. At first, we couldn't make it out, but as we turned the beam in the sunlight, the words became clear. IT wasn't safe. There were more. We found 3 more beams buried under the dirt and moss near the base of the tower. Each one had similar carvings, letters scratched with what looked like fingernails. Let me out. I'm still here. And worst of all, MOM, I'm sorry. We stood there in silence, staring at the words like they were still warm. None of us said it out loud, but I know we were all thinking the same thing. These weren't just carvings. They were messages, last words, and someone had buried the evidence. Mr. Hendrick, pale as a ghost, finally spoke. We need to leave. Now. No one argued. We packed our gear in record time, every shadow seeming to move just a little too much as we worked. But as I zipped up my bag, I glanced back at the tower one last time. And there, near the top platform, I saw it. A small figure, barefoot, dirty, in a tattered scout uniform. He was crouched down, peering over the edge, watching us. I blinked, and he was gone. That drive back was the longest of my life. Every bump in the road felt like something crawling up my spine. We didn't talk. We didn't even look at each other until we were back on the highway, the forest far behind us. But I knew I couldn't let it go. Something terrible had happened at Camp Evergreen, and someone had gone to great lengths to hide it. Once we got home, it should have been over. We were safe, out of the woods, back to real life. But none of us were the same. Michael started sleeping with a knife under his pillow. Jack wouldn't even go near a park. Oliver deleted all his hiking apps and stopped responding to Scout emails. And me? I couldn't stop thinking about the name carved into that beam. Tommy Martin. It played in my head on repeat, over and over, like some broken record. I'd hear that whisper again in the quiet moments. They said the ropes would keep us safe. and I'd remember that figure I saw at the top of the tower. So I did something I hadn't done in years. I pulled out my old laptop, logged into our troop's old email account, and dug through our inbox. There it was, the original message from Camp Evergreen. Except it wasn't from anyone named Camp Evergreen. No address, no name, just a blank sender with a single line. We need help clearing the trail. Bring strong boys. I showed it to Oliver the next day. We hadn't really talked since that final drive back. But when I showed him the email and the photo I'd taken of the note from the filing cabinet, his face went pale. "I thought you threw that away," he whispered. "I didn't. And we can't ignore this." We started digging. Old newspaper clippings, public records, scout safety complaints. At first, we didn't find much. But late one night, buried in a 1997 local paper, we found a headline that made my stomach turn. "Boy dies in climbing tower fall. Camp withheld safety records." It didn't name the camp, but the victim's name? Tommy Martin, a 12-year-old boy, fell during a climbing exercise. Rope had been frayed. No helmet. The camp denied wrongdoing. The parents filed a lawsuit, but it vanished in paperwork and settlements. That was it. That was the kid. The voice we heard. The name scratched into the beam. It wasn't just a bad fall. It was a cover-up. We called Michael and Jack the next morning. Told them everything. At first, they didn't want to hear it. Said they were done with this. That we were digging up the past for no reason. But when I showed them the photo of the beam, the words, "I'm still here," etched in dusty wood, they went quiet. And then Jack said, "If that were my kid, I'd want the world to know." So we made a plan. We gathered everything. Emails, photos, notes, the original crumpled paper from the filing cabinet, articles, witness statements from people who used to work at summer camps in the 90s. Anything we could find. It took months. And in that time, we learned the truth. Camp Evergreen wasn't just one bad place. It was part of a network, a system of underfunded, unregulated camps that cut corners, ignored safety rules, and silenced complaints. Different names, different locations, same shadowy group of people running it all behind the scenes. And every time a kid got hurt, or worse, they just closed shop, changed names, and started over somewhere else. With Oliver's help, he'd gone into journalism by then. We pitched the story to a local reporter. She listened. Then she brought it to a bigger paper. The investigation blew up. Parents came forward. More names, more kids, more stories. The article went viral. There were hearings, lawsuits. Finally, the state launched an official probe. They uncovered years of fraud, negligence, and hidden death records. It wasn't just Tommy. There were at least 5 others across different camps. Some of them still hadn't been identified. The people running it? They were arrested. One by one, they fell, caught under the weight of what they tried so hard to bury. And Camp Evergreen? The property was condemned. The tower was scheduled for demolition. We were invited to witness it, a year to the day after our visit. I almost didn't go, but something in me needed closure. So I stood with my friends, watching the wrecking crew line up their tools. The tower groaned as they began to break it apart, beams cracking and splintering under the machines. Then, as the top platform finally gave way and fell in on itself, a breeze blew through the trees. And in the quiet, I swear on my life, I heard a voice whisper, "Thank you." Oliver heard it too. We didn't say a word, but we knew. That boy, Tommy, was finally free. Later that week, when crews took down the rest of the wood, they found something behind one of the interior walls. An old helmet. Small, faded, with the name T. Martin written in Sharpie on the inside. They sent it to his parents. We never went back to scouting, never hiked together again, but we stayed close. We'd been through something that changed us, something real, something haunted. And even now, years later, when I pass a group of kids at summer camp or see a climbing tower in someone's backyard, I still get a chill down my spine. Because I know what can happen when people forget, when no one's watching. And I remember a whisper in the night. They said the ropes would keep us safe. After the demolition, we tried to move on. Michael and Jack went back to college. Oliver published a full expose in the paper, and for a time, it seemed like the system was changing. Laws were being reviewed. Camps were under tighter inspections. Parents were paying closer attention. But for me, the past didn't loosen its grip so easily. I started having dreams. Not every night, but often enough that I stopped brushing them off as coincidence. In the dreams, I was back at Camp Evergreen. Only this time, I was alone. The fog was heavier, almost choking. I'd stand at the base of the tower, looking up, and something would be waiting at the top. A boy, soaked, bruised, clutching the frayed end of a rope. He never said anything. He just stared at me with hollow eyes, as if asking a question I didn't know how to answer. And then I'd wake up, my skin cold, heart racing. One night, the dream changed. I was climbing the tower. My hands splintered on the old wood. My foot slipped. I kept going. Something was calling me from the top. Not a voice exactly. More like a feeling pulling me upward. A need to see. To know. When I reached the platform, the boy was gone. Instead, carved into the wood, was a message I'd never seen before. They're building again. New names. New woods. Same lies. I woke up drenched in sweat. The next day, I called Oliver. He'd been digging into something, but hadn't told me much. When I told him about the dream, there was a long silence on the line. "Danny," he said slowly, "I think you better come see what I found." We met the next day. Oliver laid out a map across the diner booth. Red pins dotted the state, with newspaper clippings and online listings taped beside them. New summer camps, new logos, different names, but the same financial shell companies, the same P.O. boxes, same pattern. They were doing it again. A new generation of kids headed into the woods, under the care of the same people who let Tommy fall. I felt sick. We'd torn down the tower, but not the foundation. Oliver looked at me with a quiet, haunted look. "They think we're done," he said. "But this isn't over, Danny." I nodded, gripping the old note I still kept folded in my wallet, the one that said, "Mike, we've got to cover this up. The Martin kids' parents are out for blood." We made a pact that day, not just to watch from afar, but to act, to follow every thread, track every new name, report everything we found. We wouldn't let what happened to Tommy happen again, not while we were still breathing. Sometimes, I still walk the trail behind our hometown. I pause at the edge of the woods and listen. Most days, there's nothing but birdsong and wind in the trees. But on quiet nights, every once in a while, I hear a creak, like a step on an old wooden platform, and a whisper that floats on the breeze. They said the ropes would keep us safe. And I know, Tommy's still watching. And maybe he always will be, until every last lie is exposed. Until every last camp is torn down. Until no kid has to fall alone again. Story 3. The Watcher in the Blue Ridge. I've always loved the mountains. There's something about the crisp air, the way the trees sway like they're whispering to each other, the sense of being small in a world that doesn't care who you are. It clears your mind, resets everything. That's why every fall, me and my two closest friends, Mike and Dave, pack up our gear and head out to the Blue Ridge Mountains. We've been doing this since we were kids growing up in rural Virginia. Hunting, camping, sometimes just sitting around a fire talking about life. It's kind of our thing. But the fall of 2019 was different. We decided to push further this time, deeper than we'd ever gone before. Off the usual trails, off the maps. No phones, no GPS. Just us, a couple of rifles, and the forest. Mike had a lead on a stretch of land that bordered the George Washington National Forest. Private property, supposedly untouched for decades. He got access through some friend-of-a-friend deal, and before I could really ask any questions, we were loading up my old Ford pickup and heading off. The road leading up to the site started fine, paved, smooth, nothing unusual. But within an hour, the asphalt gave way to gravel, and then the gravel turned to dirt and ruts and overgrown logging trails that hadn't seen a tire in years. By the time we finally reached the clearing, the sun was dipping behind the mountains. The sky looked bruised, like someone had smudged it with shades of purple and orange. The campsite was weird, not in a creepy way, just off. It was too flat, like the land had been leveled by something unnatural. There was a small shed nearby with neatly stacked firewood and a rusted lock hanging open. No one said it, but we all noticed it. Still, we were exhausted. We set up our tents, gathered gear, and prepped for the night. The trees around us were tall and close, and even though the sun hadn't fully set, it already felt like twilight beneath the canopy. That's when Mike pointed at the shed. "You guys see the firewood?" he said. "Stacked nice and dry. Someone's been here recently." Dave shrugged. "It's probably leftover from hunters last season. No big deal." But Mike wasn't convinced. "It looks fresh." I didn't want to admit it, but I had the same gut feeling. Still, we were already there. We weren't about to pack up just because the firewood was too dry. And here's the part one wish I could take back. We didn't use the wood. We left it in the shed and went looking for our own. Not because we had to, but because it felt more real that way, like we were living off the land. We grabbed flashlights and an axe and headed uphill into the forest, laughing like idiots, daring each other to go further. It was stupid and a little reckless, but that's how we were. At first, the woods felt alive. Crickets, rustling leaves, the distant hoot of an owl. Everything sounded right. Natural. Then, somewhere around the bend of the trail, it just stopped. No wind. No insects. No birds. Just silence. Thick, heavy silence. We froze. All three of us. No one said a word. It was like the trees were holding their breath. Like the whole forest was listening. Mike whispered, "Do you hear that?" Dave shook his head. "No, that's the problem." It was the kind of silence that gets under your skin. Makes your heart beat louder than it should. We scanned the woods with our flashlights, but there was nothing. Just trees and shadows and the growing pressure of something unseen. We stood there for maybe a full minute before the forest slowly came back to life. A single owl hooted from somewhere far off. Crickets resumed their song. The tension eased, just a little. But something had changed. We didn't say it, but all three of us could feel it. The forest wasn't welcoming anymore. Something was watching us. We didn't talk much after that. There was this unspoken agreement between us. We were going to finish gathering wood as fast as we could and get back to the safety of the fire. It sounds dumb saying it now, but out there, in that silence, the idea of the fire, the light, it felt like the only thing that could protect us. Mike kept glancing over his shoulder. Dave had his hand on the handle of the axe like he was ready to swing at anything that moved. I was holding the flashlight, scanning the trees, trying not to let my hand shake. But then I saw it. At first, it was just movement, barely visible in my peripheral vision. A low shape, slipping between the trees with this unnatural grace. I froze, squinting into the darkness. My flashlight caught on something. A branch. A shape. No eyes. There, perched on a fallen pine, maybe 10 feet off the ground, was a creature. My breath caught in my throat. It looked like a mountain lion, but wrong. Massive, too massive for this area. Its fur was a dusty, mottled brown that seemed to shimmer slightly in the flashlight beam, like its body was too slick or too dense for light to hold on to. But it was its eyes that did it. They weren't animal eyes. They were aware. Not just alert or watchful. I mean intelligent. Focused. Like it was thinking. Not about what we were, but who we were. It wasn't sizing us up as prey. It was studying us, like it was curious. I remember whispering, "Guys." They turned toward me, and as their flashlights swung up to the tree, they caught it too. 3 beams of light now locked on this thing. The creature didn't flinch. It just sat there, perfectly still, tail curled around the branch, staring at us. Dave was the first to react. "What the hell is that?" Mike reached for his sidearm. "Don't move." The creature blinked, slowly, like it didn't have a care in the world. And then, in one smooth motion, it stood on the branch. Not on all fours, on 2 legs. I swear to God. It rose up like a man stretching his back after a long day. Tall, fluid, too graceful for anything that big. It kept its eyes on us the whole time, and the worst part? It smiled. Not wide, not with teeth. Just this subtle curve of its mouth. Like it knew something we didn't. Like it enjoyed being seen. And then it leapt. Not toward us, but away, into the trees, vanishing with a whisper of leaves and branches. None of us moved. We just stood there, hearts pounding, flashlights sweeping the woods around us. Mike finally broke the silence. "We're done. Screw the wood." Nobody argued. We grabbed what little we had and made our way back to the camp as fast as we could without flat out running. And the whole way back, that feeling didn't go away. You ever get the sense that something is following you, but every time you turn around, there's nothing there? That's what it was like. We reached the campsite, breathless and wired with adrenaline, and the moment we saw the fire pit, we tossed everything down and got it burning hot and fast. That fire became our lifeline. We sat there in silence, watching the woods. No jokes, no stories, just the crackle of firewood and the occasional glance toward the shadows. At one point, Mike finally said, "That wasn't a mountain lion." Dave just shook his head. "It looked like one. Sort of, but not really." And I just sat there, staring at the dark, because I couldn't stop thinking about its eyes. It knew us. Not just that we were there, but who we were. and it wanted us to know it knew. That night, we didn't sleep. We took turns keeping watch from inside the truck. Every time the fire popped or the wind shifted, we jumped. At one point, around 2 a.m., we heard it again. A scream. It echoed through the mountains, shrill and long, starting like a cougar's cry, but ending like a man screaming into the void. It made my blood run cold. No one said a word. We just listened. And when it stopped, the silence that followed was worse than the sound itself. A kind of silence that waited. We made it to dawn, but it felt like we'd barely survived something no one could name. The early morning light filtered weakly through the trees, casting long shadows across our camp. We looked at each other, red-eyed, pale, hollow. None of us had slept. No one even tried. The fire had burned down to glowing coals, and for a brief moment, we almost convinced ourselves it was over. That we'd imagined it all. That maybe fear and fatigue had played tricks on our senses. Then I stood up and saw it. There, in the soft dirt near the edge of our clearing, was a single print. A massive paw print. I froze. My heart dropped into my stomach. "Guys," I said, but my voice came out as a rasp. "Come look at this." Mike and Dave walked over slowly. When they saw it, neither of them said a word. It was the size of a dinner plate, easy. But it wasn't just the size that got to us, it was the shape. It looked wrong. The front half was feline, like a cougar, but the back, it seemed to twist, like something had tried to copy a big cat's paw, but didn't quite get it right. The digits were too long, the claws too deep, and at the very center of the print, barely visible in the indentation, were what looked like toes. Human toes. I took a step back, a cold shiver crawling up my spine like an insect. "Tell me that's not what I think it is," Dave whispered. Mike crouched down and traced the edge of the print with one finger. "I don't think this thing's pretending to be a mountain lion anymore." The print was leading toward our camp, but there were no prints leading away. It had come in, watched us, and left. How? The fire had burned all night. We'd never heard anything. Nothing stepped on branches or rustled leaves. Nothing growled or moved. It had just been there. We didn't need to talk about it. The decision was made in that one silent moment. We packed fast. No breakfast. No coffee. Just throw everything into our bags and go. I remember Mike whispering under his breath, "This was supposed to be our escape." And I remember replying, "Well, maybe we found something out here that doesn't want to be escaped from." The hike back to the truck was the longest 2 hours of my life. The forest felt different. Not just in our heads. Either, the air was thicker, the light dimmer, even though it was morning. The trees seemed denser, like they were closing in. And that silence kept coming and going in waves. One second the birds were chirping, the next, nothing. Just our boots crunching dry leaves and our breathing. At one point, maybe 30 minutes from the truck, we heard something behind us. A long, dragging noise, like something big pulling itself through underbrush. We turned as one, flashlights raised. Nothing, but the trees swayed gently, and I swear I saw a branch bounce as if something had just leapt off it. We didn't stop again. When we finally reached the truck, Mike threw his pack in the bed and said, "I'm never coming back here." And we all silently agreed. But before we left, I felt this pull, like I needed to look back one last time, just to make sure. And there it was, at the edge of the tree line, maybe 30 yards away, barely visible through the morning fog. A figure, not an animal, not a person, something in between. Tall, hunched, arms too long, legs bent wrong, covered in fur that shimmered faintly. And those eyes, God, those eyes, they glowed. Not with reflected light, no, they glowed from within, dim and sickly green, like rotten embers, staring straight at me. Then it lifted one arm and waved. Not fast, not threatening, just a slow, deliberate motion, like it was saying goodbye. I backed toward the truck, opened the door, got in, and we drove. Fast. None of us said a word until we were halfway back to town. Even then, it was just small things. What the hell was that? Did it really wave? Why us? When we got home, we told our families we'd cut the trip short due to bad weather. Which technically wasn't a lie. There was something bad out there. Just not something you'd find on a radar. But even after the fears settled, even after sleep came back and the normal world returned, I couldn't let it go. I kept dreaming about it. The waving hand, the glowing eyes, and the print in the dirt. I had to know more. I needed to know. A week passed. Then two. I tried to go back to normal, watching TV, going to work, sitting at the bar with friends, but everything felt off. Colors were duller. Sounds felt muted. It was like my mind had split in two. One part going through the motions of daily life, the other still stuck on that mountain, haunted by glowing eyes and that impossible paw print. And then the nightmare started. Every night, I'd find myself back at that clearing. The campfire would be low, casting long shadows across the forest floor. I'd be alone, but I could hear breathing. Wet, heavy breathing, circling just outside the reach of the light. And then, always at the same moment, I'd hear that voice, right behind my ear. "We see you now." I'd wake up choking, drenched in sweat, heart hammering in my chest. I didn't talk to Mike or Dave much. I think they were trying to forget, pretending none of it happened. But I couldn't. Something had followed us down that mountain. Not physically, maybe, but in memory. In whatever dark part of the brain remembers things you weren't meant to see. I started doing research. Local folklore, newspaper archives, missing persons bulletins. And that's when I stumbled onto it. An old blog run by a guy who used to be a park ranger. It hadn't been updated since the early 2000s. Most of the posts were pretty standard. Bear safety tips, trail conditions, mushroom IDs. But buried deep in the archive was a post titled, "The Eyes in the Fog." It started like a campfire story. Sometimes, late at night, deep in the Blue Ridge, you'll see them. Two pale green lights, moving through the trees. People think it's a cougar or someone with night vision goggles. But they're wrong. Those eyes don't reflect light, they make it. I read every word. 3 times. The post ended cryptically, saying the author had kept a journal during his final years as a ranger and that he'd hidden it after retiring. He said the truth was too dangerous to make public. I tracked the guy down. His name was Charles Delaney, and he'd passed away in 2011. No wife, no kids. But I found an estate record that listed a storage unit in Roanoke. And after some smooth talking and a fake claim of being a relative doing genealogy work, I got access. Inside the storage unit was mostly junk, old uniforms, tools, a broken camping stove. But in a wooden footlocker, wrapped in waxed canvas, was a leather-bound journal. The entries started in 1958. They began innocent enough, weather reports, trail conditions, notes about campers. But by the late 60s, the tone had shifted. Entry from June 3rd, 1967. 3 hikers went missing near the northern ridge. Searched all day. No sign. Just a clearing with ash and 3 pairs of boots. I reported it up the chain, but they told me to file it as a possible animal attack. The boots were untouched. Entry from August 21st, 1971. Heard it again last night. That same scream. Part cat, part something else. It echoed in the wrong direction, bounced like it was coming from inside the trees. There's something up there, something that watches. But it was the final entry that froze my blood. Entry from October 13th, 1973. It's toying with me now. Last night, I found paw prints circling my cabin. But they weren't just paw prints. They started human, then stretched, twisted, into something else. It's evolving, or pretending. I looked into the mirror this morning, and for a second, my reflection smiled before I did. I think it's inside now. God help me. If someone finds this, stay away from these woods. Especially near Bear Skull Hollow. That's where it's strongest. The location had been circled. Bear Skull Hollow. I marked it on a topographic map and found it matched the direction we'd been hiking the night we saw the creature. I should have burned the journal. Should have walked away and never looked back. But I didn't. I couldn't. So I made a decision that I didn't even fully understand at the time. I was going back. Not to hike. Not to camp. Just to see it one more time. To prove to myself I wasn't insane. To face it and maybe end it. I left a detailed note for my brother. Told him where I was going. Packed light. No tent. Just food, water, camera traps, and my .44 Magnum. I drove back to the same remote parking spot we'd used before. Left the truck at dawn and began the long hike up, retracing our steps, heart pounding with every crunch of the trail under my boots. The forest felt different this time. Colder. Heavier. The air didn't smell like pine or damp soil. It smelled like stone and rot. Like the breath of something ancient. Birds flew away the moment I passed. Branches snapped in the distance. And I swear, I saw something run parallel to me through the trees, just far enough away that I couldn't make it out. After 3 hours, I reached the clearing. Everything was still there. The blackened ring where our fire had burned. scattered stones we'd sat on. Even a rusted fork Mike must have dropped. It was untouched, like no one had been there since we fled. I set up the camera traps around the perimeter and waited. As the sun began to set, fog crept in like spilled milk. It came fast, too fast. Then came the silence. The exact same silence from before. The kind that makes your ears ring from how loud nothing is. Then, from somewhere deep in the trees, that voice. Low, rumbling, mocking. You came back. I turned, flashlight scanning the trees. Nothing. Then the scream. That same hybrid howl, part mountain lion, part man, part wrong. Then I saw the eyes. Two of them, floating maybe 20 feet above the ground. Glowing pale green, blinking slowly. And then, as if sliding down from the air itself, the shape emerged. Tall, wrong, joints bending backward, arms long enough to touch the ground. Head shaped like a cat's skull, but distorted. Mouth too wide, teeth too straight. It stepped forward. No sound. Then it spoke again. You asked. Now see. It raised one arm and pointed behind me. I turned, shaking. There, in the fog, was me. Not a reflection. Another me. Same clothes. Same scars. Same terrified expression. But the eyes were glowing. It smiled, raised its hand, and waved. I ran. Ran like hell. I don't remember how I made it back to the truck. Just that the sun was rising and my boots were soaked in blood. None of it mine. When I got home, I plugged in the camera traps. Only one had captured anything. At 3:33 a.m., it triggered on its own. No animal. No motion. But for 2 seconds, the video showed a face staring straight into the lens. Not human. Not cat. But something in between. It smiled. And whispered. Soon. Story 4. The Shapeshifter's Truth. I didn't believe in monsters. Not until the Harding file landed on my desk. My name is Sarah Hawkins, detective with the Virginia Bureau of Investigation, and for most of my career, I dealt in facts, solid evidence, chain of custody, truth that could be printed in black ink and locked in a case file. But Alexander Harding's disappearance, it was different. The official report was simple. Harding, 31, former wilderness guide, went missing during a solo hiking trip deep in the Blue Ridge Mountains. But the real story? It was buried inside a weathered black laptop found abandoned in a motel room on the edge of the national park. On that laptop was a file, dated, detailed, and disturbing. It read like a horror novel. Shimmering lights in the trees. A creature that moved like a mountain lion but stood like a man. A presence in the dark that whispered just beyond the firelight. I wanted to dismiss it. Chalk it up to exhaustion, maybe a psychotic break. But something about his writing, something about the fear in his voice captured in that final video log, it pulled at me. So I started digging. And what I found wasn't just unsettling, it was horrifying. There were others. Over the last 30 years, people had gone missing in that same remote stretch of forest. At least a dozen hikers, campers, rangers, and even a search and rescue volunteer who disappeared during one of the early investigations. Most of the cases were quietly closed. Fell. Lost their way. Presumed dead. But the deeper I went, the more inconsistencies I found. Half-filled reports. Torn witness statements. Dates that didn't match. I sat in my dark office for hours, surrounded by files that smelled like mildew and regret. Red strings stretched across my board. Names. Locations. All pointing to the same narrow section of Blue Ridge Forest, near an old ranger outpost marked as decommissioned in 1983. But here's what really got to me. They all went missing in late fall, always around the new moon, and always in the same area locals had long called the Hollow. Most folks don't even mention it by name. The few I tracked down who lived near the trailheads would lower their voices and say things like, "That place don't belong to us," or, "Even the animals don't go there no more." And then there was the journal. It arrived in the mail. No return address. Just my name typed neatly on a yellow envelope. Inside was a leather-bound book belonging to a ranger named Eli Mercer, stationed in the Blue Ridge back in the 50s. His last entry chilled me to the bone. It watches. It waits. It wears the skin of what we fear most. I think it knows I see it now. I turned to the last page. There were no words, just scratches. Deep gouges into the paper, like claws. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Harding. About the others. About the fact that maybe this wasn't just another missing persons case. Maybe we were dealing with something else entirely. Something old. something that didn't like being seen. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I knew I had to go out there, to the hollow, to find out what happened to Harding, to see, with my own eyes, what hides in the shadows of that forest, even if it meant never coming back. We didn't talk much on the hike out of the Blue Ridge. None of us could. 2 rangers were gone, vanished without a trace. The rest of us were scraped up, bruised, and running on pure adrenaline. Every crack of a branch, every gust of wind sent chills down my spine. I kept expecting to see golden eyes peeking through the trees, or worse, to hear that voice again. Leave or join him. The phrase looped in my head like a broken record. Back at the ranger station, I gave a statement. The official kind. The kind you write when you've seen something that no one's going to believe. I didn't mention the voice, or the cave, or the thing that spoke to me with Harding's name on its tongue. I just said we were attacked by a large, unidentified animal. Possibly a bear. Fog made visibility poor. We lost contact. We'll try again. But deep down, I knew there wouldn't be a next time. I was done. Weeks passed. Then months. The nightmares started almost immediately. Always the same. The cave, the scratching on stone, the face, half man, half cat, emerging from the dark with those glimmering eyes. But the worst dreams were quieter. In them, I stood in my living room at night. I'd hear tapping at the window. I'd look up and see nothing until I did. A face in the glass, watching, smiling. Then I'd wake up, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding like a drum. At first, I chalked it up to trauma, stress, guilt. But then, things started happening in real life. I'd come home to my front door unlocked. Scratches appeared on the wood siding of my cabin, deep ones, like claws dragging across it. I installed cameras, motion sensors. Nothing caught anything, but the alerts kept going off, especially around 3:33 a.m. Every single time. Then came the smells. That same damp, earthy scent from the cave. It would drift in through the vents or seep in under the doors. I'd clean, replace filters, even sleep with the windows taped shut. But the smell always came back. That's when I knew. It hadn't let me go. It was watching me. I started researching again, harder than before. I pulled every record from state archives, combed through missing persons reports dating back to the 1950s. The pattern was there, subtle but real. Every decade, a cluster of disappearances. Same rough area, same time of year, late September. Always hikers, campers, rangers, and always ending the same way. Nothing found, no clues, no bodies, just rumors. Whispers about a place deep in the mountains where the trees moved, where people weren't alone even when they were. The name came up again and again, the Watcher. Some thought it was folklore. Others believed it was a spirit. Some said it was a guardian, punishing those who went too far into sacred land. But the descriptions? They matched. Tall, feline, intelligent, and always watching. Then something happened that I still can't explain. One night, I went to check the footage on one of my trail cams I'd secretly hidden along a forest access road. It was motion activated, with infrared. I played through the files. Raccoons, deer, wind, normal stuff. But then, one clip. 3:33 a.m. The feed activates. The forest is still, and then it appears. A shape moves from the left side of the frame. Slowly, deliberately. It steps into full view, 7 feet tall, upright, just like before. But this time, it walks toward the camera, and then it leans down, real close, until only its face fills the frame. And then, it smiles. Not a snarl, not a reflex, a smile. Then darkness. The feed cuts out. No sign of tampering, no corrupted files. Just gone. I don't know how it found the camera. I don't know why it smiled, but I do know what it meant. It was a message. I know where you are. I remember you. And I'm not done yet. Since then, I've changed my locks. Moved twice. Started documenting everything. Every sound, every sighting, every report of hikers who vanished without explanation in the Blue Ridge. I've made it my job to track the thing from a distance. I don't go back there. I never will. But I watch. From here. And I wait. Because something tells me it's still growing. Learning. Maybe even spreading. And I fear one day it won't be content with just watching anymore. Story 5. The Spirit Bell in the Backyard. It all started on a quiet Saturday morning. The kind where the air feels just a little too still. I'd just moved into a small house on the edge of town, Nothing fancy, just something cheap and quiet. It had a fenced-in backyard, a creaky old shed, and a patch of dirt I figured I could turn into a garden. I'd spent most of that week pulling up weeds and digging out old roots. That day, I was turning over a corner of the yard near the fence when my shovel hit something solid. At first, I thought it was a rock, pretty normal for this part of the state. But after brushing away some dirt, I realized it was metal. Round, bronze or copper maybe, stained green from years underground. It was a small bell, the kind you'd maybe see hanging in an old schoolhouse or from a church steeple, only smaller, maybe the size of a grapefruit. It had a strange symbol etched into the top. Not a cross, not letters, more like spirals wrapped around a circle, almost like something drawn by hand a long time ago. I picked it up. It was heavy for its size and felt warm, weirdly warm, even though the air was cool. There was no rope or clapper inside, just the hollow space and that strange buzzing feeling in my hand when I held it. I showed it to my neighbor later that day, an older guy named Paul who'd lived on the street for decades. When I pulled it out of the box, his face changed. He didn't even touch it. "Where'd you find that?" he asked. "Back corner of the yard, buried under a few inches of dirt." He stared at it for a long time before shaking his head. "You should put that thing back where you found it." I laughed it off. "What? You think it's cursed?" He didn't laugh. "I think it's old. And sometimes old things were buried for a reason." I didn't really believe in that kind of stuff. Ghosts, curses, haunted objects. But there was something about the bell that got under my skin. That night, I left it on the kitchen counter, still covered in a little dried dirt. Around midnight, I woke up to a strange sound. It wasn't loud, just soft enough that it took me a second to figure out what I was hearing. It sounded like wind chimes, except I didn't own any. I got up, checked the windows. Nothing. The wind was still. Everything was still. The next morning, I went out to the yard to keep digging. I told myself the sound must have been from a neighbor's porch or something drifting in from the woods. But when I walked out back, something felt different. The air was heavier, like right before a thunderstorm. I kept telling myself I was being silly, but then I noticed something. The spot where I dug up the bell, there was a ring burned into the ground. Not charred, but darker, like the grass had died overnight in a perfect circle. Dead center was the hole where the bell had been. I didn't know what to think. Still don't, honestly. That was just the beginning. If I'd known what was coming, I would have buried it again. Deeper this time. Maybe even left the house altogether. But it was already too late. The bell had been uncovered, and something had heard it. After I dug up that bell, the weirdness didn't stop. It got worse, slow at first, like something creeping in around the edges of my life. That first night I left it on the counter, I kept hearing those faint chime sounds, soft like wind brushing over hollow metal. But the thing didn't even have a clapper. I checked it again and again, just empty space inside. The next few days, little things started happening. I'd come home and find the kitchen light on, even though I was sure I'd turned it off. The faucet in the bathroom would be dripping, even though I'd fixed it just the week before. My front door, locked every night without fail, was cracked open one morning when I came out for coffee. I tried to tell myself I was tired. Moving, settling in, adjusting to new surroundings. Maybe I just wasn't paying attention. That's what I told myself. Until the third night. It was around 2 a.m. when I woke up again. This time it wasn't wind chimes I heard. It was a knock, 3 short taps. Not loud, just deliberate. Like someone knocking on a door with their knuckles. I sat up in bed and just listened. For a while, there was nothing. Then again, knock, knock, knock. Not from the front door. Not the back either. It was coming from inside the house. I got out of bed, heart pounding, and grabbed the baseball bat I kept by the nightstand. I checked every room, every closet, even the crawl space. Nothing. But when I passed the kitchen, the bell was gone from the counter. My stomach dropped. I looked all over for it, and finally found it sitting in the middle of the hallway floor, perfectly upright, like someone had set it there carefully. The floor around it was wet, like someone had tracked in water, except there weren't any footprints. Just the water, in a faint circle around the bell. That's when I stopped sleeping well. Even when I managed to doze off, I'd wake up from these strange dreams. Never quite the same, but always the same feeling. In one, I was standing at the edge of my backyard at night, staring at a figure in the dark. I couldn't see its face. In another, I was underground, holding the bell in my hands, but it was ringing, even though I wasn't moving. The sound was loud and low, echoing like it came from somewhere much deeper than the bell itself. By the end of the week, the dreams bled into my waking hours. I'd glance at the hallway mirror and think I saw someone behind me. Just for a second, a shadow too tall to be mine. Lights started flickering, and not just one or two bulbs. Every light in the house would dim for a split second, like something passed through the wiring. One morning, I stepped outside to get the paper and found something carved into my porch. Not scratched with a knife or key, carved deep into the wood like with a chisel. It was the same spiral symbol from the bell. I hadn't shown that symbol to anyone. I called Paul, my neighbor, figuring maybe he knew something, maybe just local history or a story. He didn't pick up, so I walked over to his place. When he finally opened the door, he looked like he hadn't slept in days. The second he saw me, he shook his head. "You still got that thing?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Why?" He stepped out onto the porch and lit a cigarette. "You remember the Morgans that used to live there? Before the last guy?" I nodded vaguely. "Couple with the dogs, right?" "Yeah. One of them, Nancy, I think. She told me once she'd hear voices out back. Said they buried something when they moved in, but wouldn't say what. Then they packed up and left in the middle of the night. No moving truck, nothing." I didn't say anything, just kept looking at him. "You should bury it again," he said after a long pause. "Maybe deeper this time." That night, I decided I would. I got a flashlight, some gloves, and took the bell out back. But when I stepped onto the lawn, I froze. There were footprints in the dirt, bare feet, no shoes. The grass had been flattened in a perfect circle, right where I'd first dug up the bell. And standing in the middle of that circle, unmoving, was a figure. I couldn't make out its face, or even if it was facing me at all. But I felt it looking, watching. It didn't move. Neither did I. After a long minute, I turned and ran back inside, slamming the door shut behind me. I left the bell on the porch that night and locked every door, every window. But that didn't matter anymore. I understood then. This wasn't about the bell. Not exactly. The bell was just the key, the thing that opened something. Something that had been waiting a long, long time. I didn't sleep at all that night. Even with every door locked and every window shut tight, I knew it was still out there. Not just the bell, whatever had come with it. Whatever I'd let loose when I dug it up. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind outside made me flinch. And through it all, I could swear I still heard it, that faint metallic chime. No wind, no clapper, just a sound that didn't belong, drifting in like smoke through the cracks. The next morning, I stepped out onto the porch, and the bell was gone. Not knocked over, not rolled away, just gone. I checked the yard, the bushes, even the crawl space under the porch. Nothing. But the grass where the bell had been sitting was burned, blackened, dead in a perfect circle. That day, my house felt different. Heavier, somehow. I'd walk into a room and feel like someone else had just walked out. The air felt thick, like after a thunderstorm, only there was no rain. Just static. Around noon, I started noticing the smell, faint but foul, like something old and wet, rotting beneath the floorboards. I cleaned everything, took out the trash, scrubbed the drains. The smell didn't leave. In fact, by sundown, it got stronger. That night, the knocking came back. 3 taps. Always 3. But now it wasn't just from inside the house. I'd hear it on the walls, the ceiling. Once, I swear it came from under my bed. I moved into the living room, too scared to stay in my own bedroom. I left all the lights on and sat on the couch with the TV, playing some old sitcom reruns just to drown out the silence. It helped a little, until the power went out. No storm, no warning, just click, darkness. I sat there for a second, too scared to move. Then I grabbed my flashlight from the end table and flicked it on. Right in front of me, in the middle of the living room floor, was the bell. It hadn't been there before, and it was ringing. No hand touched it, no breeze. But it chimed once, twice, then a third time, and I dropped the flashlight. The light rolled across the floor, beams spinning across the walls like a searchlight. And that's when I saw it, in the reflection of the dark TV screen. A figure, standing behind me. I turned fast, but there was nothing there. Just cold air, the kind that makes your breath fog even inside a warm room. I ran. I didn't grab my keys, didn't grab a jacket, just bolted out the front door and ran barefoot down the street until I reached the gas station at the corner. I must have looked insane, wild-eyed, shaking, in a t-shirt and flannel pants. The clerk called the cops. They walked me home, checked the house. Of course, nothing was there. No bell, no footprints, no sign of entry. The smell? Gone. The scorch mark on the grass? Vanished. They probably thought I was on something. One of the officers suggested maybe it was stress-related, that I'd been seeing things. But I knew what I saw. I knew what I heard. That night, I stayed at a friend's place. I didn't go back home for 3 days. And when I did, I walked in slow, half expecting the bell to be sitting on my bed. It wasn't. Nothing strange happened for a while after that. But the thing is, once something like that touches your life, it doesn't just disappear. It lingers. Lights still flicker sometimes, even when the bulbs are brand new. I still hear the bell on some nights. Not loud, just far away. Like it's ringing from underground. Sometimes I find dirt tracked into the house. Not from my shoes. Fresh dirt, in little trails, leading from one room to another. Once, I found a muddy handprint on my bathroom mirror. It wasn't mine. But the worst thing? Sometimes I dream I'm back in the yard, digging, and the ground is soft, like fresh-turned soil. And I see my hands pulling something up. Not a bell, not anymore. Something with eyes. Something that grins. And every single time, I wake up just before I scream. And I always wake up to silence. Except for one night, about a month ago. I woke up in the middle of the night to that familiar chime. Just once. I sat up in bed, barely breathing. My bedroom door was open, even though I always keep it shut. And there, right at the edge of the hallway, I saw something. A tall, shadowed figure, standing still. Watching. Then it whispered, low, like wind slipping through a crack. You rang. And then it was gone. I've since moved. New place. New town. I buried the bell, or whatever it had become, miles away, in a place no one goes. I poured salt around the site, burned sage, did everything people said might work. But some nights, when everything is quiet, I still hear it. Faint. Far away. Ding. And I know I'll never be free. Story 6. The office hallway at 3 a.m. I never liked working the night shift, but money was tight, and I couldn't afford to say no. The job was simple. Overnight security at a downtown office building. Sit at the front desk, do a few patrols, and make sure nothing out of the ordinary happens. The building was quiet, old, and kind of stuck in the early 2000s. Yellowish lights, stained carpet, buzz from the vending machines. Nothing special. My shift started at 10 p.m. and ran until 6 in the morning. Most nights were slow. I'd sit there scrolling through my phone, sipping gas station coffee, maybe watching a movie on the small laptop I kept behind the desk. The only sounds were the soft hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional air conditioning kicking on. The building had 6 floors. I was only required to check the 3rd floor once per shift, usually around 2:30 or 3 a.m. That's when everything always felt off. See, floor 3 wasn't like the others. It used to be occupied by a law firm that went under a few years ago. Since then, it's been empty, furniture gone, lights dimmed, nothing but dusty offices and quiet halls. But for some reason, they never closed it off. The elevator still stopped there, and I still had to check it every night. The first few nights were fine. I'd ride the elevator up, step into the dark hallway, shine my flashlight around, and make a quick loop before heading back down. But around my 5th or 6th night, I started to notice things. Subtle things. The first time, it was just a door that was open. Office 312. It wasn't wide open, just cracked a little. Enough that I could see the edge of the room beyond it. I knew I'd checked that door the night before. It had been shut tight. But maybe I missed it, I told myself. No big deal. I walked over, nudged it open, peeked in. Empty room. Bare floor. Nothing but a dusty window and a weird draft that sent a chill down my spine. I closed the door and moved on. Then came the sounds. I was walking past the break room on the 3rd floor when I heard something move. Like a soft scraping sound, like plastic sliding against tile. I froze and listened. Nothing. I told myself it was the building settling. Old places creak and groan at night. No reason to panic. The next night, it happened again. I was walking past Office 318 when I heard what sounded like a whisper. Just a single word. Couldn't tell what it said, but it stopped me cold. I spun around, swept the hall with my flashlight. Nothing. But I felt it. That awful feeling like someone was behind me, breathing on my neck. I didn't even finish the patrol that night. I got back in the elevator and went straight to the front desk, trying to calm myself down. I told my supervisor the next day. He laughed it off. Said weird things happen on night shifts and that I was probably just tired. But it didn't stop. The week after that, I walked into the hallway and saw that the lights were already on. I always have to turn them on myself. That's part of the routine. But this time, they were already flickering, soft, sickly yellow. And further down the hall, I could swear I saw something. Just for a second. A figure. Not moving. Just standing still. At the far end of the hallway. I blinked and it was gone. I should have quit then. Honestly, I thought about it. But again, money was tight, and I couldn't afford to walk away from a paycheck. So I kept coming back. Every night, around 3 a.m., I'd get that tight feeling in my chest the moment I stepped onto the third floor. It was like walking into a place I wasn't supposed to be. Like the air itself was warning me. I started changing my routine, going earlier, sometimes later, but it didn't matter. The moment I stepped into that hallway, it felt like time stopped. Like the rest of the world was sleeping, and only I was awake and being watched. One night, I brought a small Bluetooth speaker and started playing music softly as I walked the floor. Just enough to break the silence. It helped a little, made me feel less alone. But when I reached the end of the hall, the music cut out. Just gone. Not paused. Not skipped. Just dead silence. And then I heard it. Footsteps. Not mine. Coming from behind me. Slow. Heavy. Not hurried. Just deliberate. I turned slowly, flashlight shaking in my hand. The hallway was empty. I backed up toward the elevator, never taking my eyes off the dark corridor. Hit the button over and over until it finally dinged and opened. I jumped in and didn't look back. I didn't tell anyone that time. What was I going to say? That I heard invisible footsteps? But the fear didn't fade. It followed me. Even during the day, I'd find myself checking over my shoulder, listening for sounds that weren't there. I started having trouble sleeping. I'd dream about that hallway. Longer, darker, doors creaking open on their own. And sometimes, in those dreams, I'd see it again. That figure, standing at the end of the hall, watching, just waiting. I told myself it was just a job, that maybe I was imagining things. But deep down I knew. The third floor wasn't empty, and it definitely wasn't abandoned. I told myself I was done with the third floor. After that night with the footsteps, the silence, the feeling that something was trailing just inches behind me, I told myself I wouldn't go back up there again. But the schedule didn't care how I felt. The following night, I sat at the front desk longer than usual, trying to build up the nerve. I drank 2 cups of coffee and stared at the monitors, half hoping something, anything, would give me an excuse to stay put. But everything was quiet. Normal. My supervisor left a note. Make sure to check all floors tonight. We've got a new client touring next week. So, like an idiot, I grabbed my flashlight, tucked my badge into my jacket, and headed for the elevator. The ride up to the third floor was slower than usual. Maybe that was just in my head. Each second stretched longer than the last, and when the doors finally opened, that familiar cold air greeted me. Not regular air conditioning chill, but that deep, unnatural cold that sinks into your bones. The hallway stretched out in front of me, dimly lit, with the lights flickering softly like they were struggling to stay alive. I stepped out. This time, something felt different. It wasn't just the air. It was the way sound moved. My boots made the usual dull thuds on the carpet, but after each step, there was a slight echo, like the hallway was repeating me, but just a second off. I stopped walking. There it was again. Thud. One more step. Another delayed thud. My breath caught in my throat. I slowly turned around. The hallway behind me was empty. But I swear, I saw something at the very end of the corridor. Just for a second. A flicker of movement. Like someone stepping back around the corner. I aimed my flashlight down the hall, but the beam didn't reach far enough. It just disappeared into the gloom. I stayed there frozen, heart hammering so hard it hurt. I knew I should go. I should press the elevator button and get the hell out. But something told me I had to look. I needed to know. So I started walking. Slowly, carefully. The deeper into the hallway I went, the heavier the air seemed to get. Like walking underwater. I passed office 312, the one that had been cracked open a few nights ago. Still closed now. I kept going. The farther I walked, the darker it felt. Even though the lights were still on overhead, the colors were just off, muted, like a faded photograph. And then I saw it again. This time it wasn't a flicker. It was a shape. A person. At least, it looked like one. Standing halfway between 2 doorways. Perfectly still. No features. Just a silhouette. I raised my flashlight and pointed it right at the figure, but it didn't react. The light passed right through where its face should have been, like it wasn't really there. I blinked and it was gone. Not moved. Not ran. Just gone. My legs didn't want to move. I stood there for what felt like 10 minutes, barely breathing, ears straining for any sound. Nothing. No wind. No creaking. No footsteps. Just silence. I finally convinced myself to move. I stepped closer to where I thought the figure had been. There was nothing unusual. No footprints. No signs anyone had been there. But I did notice something strange, a smudge on the wall. Not dirt or dust. It looked oily, almost like a handprint made of ash. I leaned in and saw it clearer, a streak that dragged downward, like someone had been sliding their fingers down the wall. I backed away. Something wasn't right. I could feel it in my gut. I turned to head back, but the hallway didn't look the same. It looked longer. I knew the elevator was supposed to be maybe 40 feet behind me, but it looked twice that now. And the overhead lights? They were dimmer, flickering in a weird rhythm, like a heartbeat. I started walking faster. Behind me, I heard something shift. A soft shuffle, like shoes dragging lightly on carpet. I broke into a jog. Then I heard the whisper, right behind my ear. It wasn't words, just a breath, warm and wet. I spun around and shouted, "Who's there?" No one. But the air, it moved, like something had just been there. I didn't walk the rest of the way to the elevator. I ran. I hit the button so many times the plastic cracked. The doors opened and I dove in, slamming the close button without caring if I looked like a lunatic. As the door slid shut, I saw something in the reflection, just for a second, over my shoulder. That same shape, standing in the hallway. And even though it didn't have a face, I knew it was staring right at me. I rode the elevator down in dead silence, every muscle in my body tense. When I got to the lobby, I walked straight to my desk and sat down, too rattled to even drink my coffee. The cameras? They didn't show anything. Just me, walking the floor like nothing happened. But I know what I saw. I know what followed me. And worst of all, I wasn't sure it stayed on the 3rd floor. Because when I got home that morning, just as I stepped into my apartment and shut the door behind me, I heard it again. A single, soft shuffle on the carpet. And that faint breath. Closer now. I didn't want to go back. Not after what I saw. Not after what followed me home. But rent doesn't pay itself. And when you're working 2 jobs to keep your head above water, fear doesn't carry much weight with your boss. He just asked if the cameras were working, if the doors were locked. I said yes. I didn't mention the shadow figure or the breath on my neck. I didn't mention the oily handprint that smeared my bedroom wall the morning after. I thought maybe if I ignored it, it'd stop. You know, like when you're a kid and you pull the blanket over your head and pretend the monster's not there. The 3rd floor was quiet for the next couple shifts. I didn't see the figure. The elevator worked fine. Lights stayed on. No more whispering. But I never shook the feeling that something had changed. Like it had decided to wait. To get closer without being seen. Then one night, things got worse. It was 2:47 a.m. That's the time it always started. My shift had been uneventful. Just me and the stale smell of break room coffee. I was watching reruns on my phone, earbuds in, trying to keep my eyes open when the lights on the security feed flickered. Just once. The 3rd floor. I paused the video and stared at the grainy screen. Nothing moved, but the camera had glitched for a split second. Just enough to make your stomach drop. I told myself it was probably the motion sensor resetting. Then the door to the stairwell opened on its own. I froze. On the screen, you could see the door slowly creak inward, then stay wide open. No one stepped through. Just an open door to nowhere. I leaned closer to the monitor, squinting. Still nothing. But the camera's feed began to pulse. Not glitch. Pulse. Like something was interfering with the signal. Then the lights went out. Not just on the monitor. In the entire building. Total blackout. I sat there in pitch dark for a moment, my heart pounding. I fumbled for my flashlight and clicked it on. The beam barely cut through the darkness, but I wasn't about to go wandering around without it. The backup lights kicked on a few seconds later, dim red emergency lights that made everything look like a horror movie set. And then I heard it. From somewhere above me. A dragging sound. Like something heavy scraping across tile. It echoed through the stairwell, down the hall, through the vents. I couldn't tell where it came from exactly. It was like the building itself was moaning. I grabbed the radio. Dispatch? Can anyone hear me? We've got a power issue. Something's moving on the 3rd floor. Only static. Then, a voice. Not mine. Not my boss. Just one word. Downstairs. Whispered. Soft. But it wasn't through the radio. It came from right behind me. I spun around, flashlight sweeping wildly across the lobby. Empty. My hand shook as I reached for the elevator controls. Dead. No power. I had to use the stairs. Every step up was like walking into a trap. The air got colder. The red lights barely lit the stairwell. I could hear my own footsteps, and something else, matching me, step for step. When I reached the third floor, the stairwell door was already open. Waiting. I stepped into the hallway. The walls were different. The paint bubbled and cracked. The carpet felt damp, like it had soaked in something foul. The lights overhead buzzed and twitched, casting long shadows that didn't seem to match where I was standing. Then I saw it again. The figure. But this time, it wasn't still. It was walking, slowly, towards me. But something was off. Its arms were too long. Its shoulders too narrow. It didn't walk like a person. It flowed, like smoke trapped in a body that didn't quite fit. I raised the flashlight. My breath hitched. Its face, there wasn't one. Just the suggestion of features. Like someone had smudged it out. And the closer it got, the colder I felt. My fingers went numb. My legs locked in place. Why me? I whispered aloud, half a prayer. The figure stopped. Then, as if answering, the lights behind it exploded, one by one, until the hallway went pitch black again. That broke me. I turned and ran. Back to the stairwell. Down 2 steps at a time. The sound behind me wasn't footsteps anymore. It was something crawling. Fast. Too fast. I stumbled out into the lobby and dove behind the front desk. My flashlight rolled away, its beams spinning wildly across the floor. And then silence. No crawling. No breathing. I waited, counting seconds, trying not to cry. I don't know how long I stayed there. Maybe a few minutes. Maybe hours. When the main power came back on, the lights flickered, then held steady. My radio crackled back to life. Hey, everything okay? We had a glitch in the grid. I didn't answer. I quit the next day. Didn't give notice. Didn't return my badge. I left that job, that building, that thing, whatever it was, behind me. But some nights, when I wake up around 2:47 a.m., I swear I can still hear it. The soft shuffle of footsteps. And that breath, right behind me. Story 7. The Whistle and the Plastic Rustling. I was just happy to find something cheap. After a rough breakup and a stretch of sleeping on a friend's couch, I finally signed a lease on a tiny apartment just outside the city. It wasn't much. Old building, creaky floors, paint peeling around the windows. But the rent was low, and utilities were included, so I took it without asking too many questions. I moved in on a rainy Thursday. The air inside was stuffy, like the place hadn't been lived in for a while. There was a faint smell, something I couldn't quite place. Not rotten, not moldy exactly, just off. I opened all the windows, lit a cheap candle, and told myself I was imagining it. It felt weird to unpack alone. The apartment was quiet. Too quiet. Even with the city just a few blocks away, I couldn't hear traffic or neighbors. The walls seemed to absorb sound. I dropped a book in the living room and barely heard the thud. That first night, I didn't sleep well. I kept waking up to little noises. Plastic rustling, like someone shifting around inside a grocery bag. I figured it was something in the kitchen, a loose trash bag maybe, or the wind blowing through the cracked window frame. Still, I got up to check. Nothing. Just my dimly lit kitchen and the faint hum of the refrigerator. When I lay back down, I thought I heard whistling. Just a few notes, soft and strange, like someone trying to mimic a tune but not quite getting it right. I sat up, heart thumping, and held my breath. It stopped immediately. Probably the neighbor, I told myself. Thin walls, old building, weird acoustics. I had a million excuses for everything. But the next morning, I realized something. The unit next to mine was empty. I passed it on the way to the elevator and saw the door cracked open, paint stripped near the bottom. Inside was bare. No furniture, no curtains, nothing but dusty floors and an old air conditioning unit rattling in the wall. That night, the plastic rustling came back. Louder this time, like someone was moving bags around just outside my bedroom door. I opened it fast, half expecting to catch a raccoon or something that snuck in. Nothing. I checked every corner, even the cabinets and under the bed. It was just me and the silence. Until I got back in bed. Then the whistling started again. Same tune. Same weird, broken rhythm. Like someone wasn't sure of the notes. It came from the direction of the living room this time. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and stepped out. I don't know what I expected. Someone standing there? A busted pipe making strange noises? Maybe I wanted it to be something I could explain. But the room was empty. Except the plastic bags I'd left on the kitchen counter from moving day, tied up and untouched, were now on the floor. Scattered. One of them had been torn open. I stood there, heart racing, trying to make sense of it. I knew I hadn't touched them. I knew they weren't like that when I went to bed. And I sure as hell knew I wasn't imagining the whistle. I tried to tell myself it was just stress, nerves from the move. Maybe I'd sleep better with some background noise. So I played soft music from my phone and kept the lights on low. Didn't help. Around 3:30 a.m., I woke up to the sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming from the kitchen. Not heavy, just soft enough to make you question them. I didn't move. Just lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening. Then, once again, the plastic rustled. And the whistling started. Closer this time. Right outside my bedroom door. That's when I realized something that chilled me more than anything else that night. The tune was familiar. It was the same one I used to whistle as a kid when I felt nervous. Something I hadn't done in years. Something almost no one knew. I didn't sleep again after that. And I started keeping the lights on after dark. I started to dread going home. Every night felt heavier than the one before. I'd fumble with my keys, step inside, and just stand in the doorway for a second, listening. Not for anything specific, but for the absence of peace. Like the apartment was holding its breath, waiting. I tried to convince myself it was just anxiety, maybe a delayed reaction to the breakup, the move, the stress of starting over. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just in my head. Things kept happening. The plastic rustling turned into full-blown movement. Not just the bags. I'd leave a chair pushed in at the table and come back from brushing my teeth to find it pulled halfway out. I'd fold the blanket on the couch before bed and find it crumpled on the floor in the morning. Then there was the smell. It had changed. At first, it was just stale air and mildew, what you'd expect from an old apartment. But after the first week, it turned sharp, like a mix of copper and something sour. It was strongest in the living room, especially near the far wall by the window. I scrubbed the floor, wiped the baseboards, checked for mold. Nothing. I thought about calling maintenance. But what was I going to say? Hey, I think the air smells like something's watching me. The worst part was how quiet it got. The kind of quiet that hurts your ears. There'd be long stretches where I couldn't hear anything. No cars outside. No footsteps from the floor above. No fridge hum. Just dead silence. And then, out of nowhere, that soft whistle would drift in. Always the same tune. Always incomplete. I started leaving my TV on just to have sound. It didn't help. The whistle would still come, like it didn't care about noise. Like it wanted to be heard. One night, I was brushing my teeth when I noticed the hallway light flicker. I leaned out to check the bulb, standard old apartment stuff. But then something caught my eye. The shadow. It was subtle, just the edge of it. Not cast by anything I could see. It was standing near the kitchen table, just out of reach of the light. I froze, toothbrush still in my mouth. My heart dropped into my stomach. When I stepped out, it was gone. I didn't sleep at all that night. I kept thinking I saw things move in the corners of the room. Just little shifts, like something ducking out of view when I turned my head. I started recording on my phone, just in case. A few times I caught flickers, tiny jumps in the frame, like a skipped beat. No clear shapes. Just wrongness. I told myself it was tricks of the light. Shadows playing games with a tired mind. But I knew better. Especially after what happened next. One night, I was lying in bed, the blanket pulled up to my chin, staring at the ceiling, too tired to keep my eyes open, too scared to close them. The apartment was dead quiet. Not even the wind. Then came the sound of plastic rustling. Slow, deliberate. It started in the kitchen. Then the footsteps, barefoot, soft against the floor. Not heavy enough to be a grown adult. Not light enough to be a pet. Just wrong. They moved from the kitchen to the hallway. And then stopped. Right outside my bedroom door. I stared at the door, frozen. The doorknob didn't turn. The door didn't move. But I knew something was on the other side. Then came the whistle. Not distant. Right there. As if someone was standing inches from the wood. Their mouth pressed close, breathing out that broken, eerie melody. And then, my name. It wasn't loud. It was a whisper, but it was clear. My full name. Not just the first. Not a nickname. The way my mom used to say it when I was in trouble. Soft and low, but full of knowing. I felt cold sweep through me, like the air had been sucked out of the room. I couldn't speak. Couldn't scream. Couldn't move. And then the door creaked. Not open, but just slightly breathed inward, like something was leaning against it from the other side. Pressing gently, I bolted upright and turned on every light I could find. There was no one there. Nothing. I slept with the lights on, the bedroom door barricaded with a chair and a knife under my pillow. I knew it wouldn't help, because whatever was in that apartment, it wasn't human. It wasn't trying to scare me. It was watching me, waiting, and somehow it knew me. After that night, I knew I couldn't pretend anymore. Whatever was happening in my apartment wasn't some harmless quirk of an old building. It was something else, something real, and it had started to recognize me. I kept all the lights on for days, slept with them buzzing overhead, flickering slightly as if straining to hold back the dark. I didn't care about the electricity bill. I just needed to feel like I had some kind of control. But lights didn't stop it. Not really. Every night, around 3 a.m., I'd hear it again. The crinkle of plastic in the kitchen. The faint whistling that never finished the tune. Sometimes, it would echo from the bathroom. Other times, from inside the walls. Like the building itself had hollow spaces that let this thing move freely behind the scenes. One night, I walked into the living room and saw the plastic bag on the floor again. Same one I'd thrown out twice already. I stared at it for a while, didn't even pick it up. Just stood there, waiting for it to move. It didn't. But then I heard the whisper again. This time, it was inside the room with me. I didn't catch the words at first. Just the tone, breathy, slow, like someone exhaling syllables they didn't fully want me to understand. But it was close. I turned around, heart thudding in my chest, and I swear to God I saw the curtain move, like someone had been standing there and had just stepped back. My voice cracked as I called out, "Who's there?" Nothing. I walked over to the curtain and yanked it open, flashlight in hand. There was no one, just the empty window. But there was condensation on the glass, like someone had been breathing against it. A smudged print, smaller than a hand, like it had too many fingers. I started keeping a journal, just to keep track. I wrote down everything. The smells, the sounds, the times they happened. I didn't know what I was hoping for. Maybe that I'd see a pattern, or maybe I just wanted to prove to myself that I wasn't imagining it. But then the whispers got bolder. They started saying things I recognized. One night, I heard my name again, drawn out slow like a lullaby. Then I heard my mom's voice. I hadn't heard it in years. She passed when I was 17. But there it was, whispering a childhood nickname no one else knew. That broke something in me. I fell to my knees in the kitchen, hands shaking, tears stinging my eyes. "Stop," I whispered. "Please, stop." And just like that, silence. Total silence. But not peace. Something had heard me, and it didn't stop. The next night, the whisper came from under the bed. I hadn't even laid down yet. I'd just come in from brushing my teeth, and there it was, soft, slow words I couldn't quite make out, but with just enough rhythm to sound like speech. I dropped to the floor and shined my flashlight beneath the bed. Nothing, except for one thing. A scrap of paper that hadn't been there before. It was torn, dirty, but I could make out the writing. Red ink, scrawled and shaky. "Don't answer when it knocks." I stared at it for a long time. My mouth had gone dry, and I couldn't bring myself to move. Not until the knock came. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Not from the front door. From inside the apartment. Behind the closet door. The same closet I hadn't opened since I moved in. Not because I was scared, at first, but because it had always felt off. Too cold. Too still. I backed away. The air felt heavy, like the room was pressing in on me. The smell had returned, stronger than ever. Rot, wet dirt, and something like burnt plastic. I didn't open the closet. I couldn't. I locked myself in the bathroom that night, curled up on the floor, too afraid to sleep. The next morning, the note was gone. The knocking didn't stop. It came every night at the same time. Sometimes from the closet, sometimes from the window. I moved the couch to block the bedroom door. I covered every mirror. I unplugged everything. Still it came. The whistle, the plastic, the voice. One night, I woke up to find the door wide open. The couch had been pushed aside, like it had been moved from the other side. My phone was missing from the nightstand. I found it the next day on the kitchen table, still recording. There was 5 hours of audio. I skipped through it, fingers shaking, until I hit the last minute. There was breathing, then the whistle, then my voice. But I hadn't said anything. The voice on the tape whispered, clear as day. "It's warmer now. It wants in." That was the last night I spent in that apartment. I grabbed what I could and left. Didn't wait for sunrise. I drove straight to my brother's place 2 towns over and didn't go back. I never told the landlord. I never even picked up the rest of my stuff. I still hear it sometimes. The whistle. In dreams, mostly. But sometimes in the middle of the night, when I'm between sleep and waking, I hear the rustle of plastic, soft and patient. And the whisper, always behind me, always just out of reach. You left the door open. Story 8. The storage wall scratching. I started working the night shift at the storage facility because I needed the hours. After getting laid off from my last job, this was the first offer that didn't involve fast food or door-to-door sales, and the pay wasn't terrible. Plus, how hard could it be? Watch a bunch of locked storage units from a tiny office, walk the perimeter once in a while, log any activity. Easy money. The place was on the edge of town, tucked behind an old gas station and a beat-up diner that hadn't changed since the 70s. It wasn't exactly welcoming, but I figured that was the point. People paid for privacy out there. You could stash just about anything in those metal containers, and no one would ask questions. My first couple of shifts were quiet. Boring, even. I brought a thermos of coffee, a book, and my phone, and mostly sat in the little office next to the gate, watching the grainy black and white monitors cycle through the camera feeds. The facility had 3 long rows of units, row A, B, and C, each about 30 units long. The lights lining the aisles were motion activated, so they'd blink on when anything moved. It was kind of eerie at first. A light would flicker on at the far end of a row for no reason, and by the time I looked at the monitor, nothing would be there. I chalked it up to bugs or small animals, probably raccoons or strays. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched sometimes. Not in a paranoid way, just that weird, prickly awareness you get when someone's eyes are on you. Then came the third night. Around 2:30 a.m., I was doing my regular walkthrough. I took my flashlight and clipboard and walked the perimeter fence, checked each row. The wind had picked up, rattling the chain link and whistling through the metal gutters. That part of town always felt colder at night, like the air didn't move the same. When I got to row C, I noticed one of the units, number C17, had a weird smell around it, like damp carpet, mixed with something metallic. I paused and sniffed the air. It wasn't strong, but it made my nose wrinkle. I checked the lock. It was still sealed. Nothing looked tampered with. That was when I first heard the scratching. It was faint, just a soft shhhk noise coming from inside the unit. I froze and held my breath. My ears strained to make sure it wasn't just wine scraping something nearby, but it was steady, rhythmic. It didn't match the wind, and it didn't stop when I stepped closer. I knocked on the metal door, half expecting it to stop. It didn't. I don't know what I thought would happen, but that steady scraping continued like whoever, or whatever, was inside didn't care that I was there. I radioed the office, told the system I was checking a suspicious noise at C17, then stood there another minute, listening. Still scratching. Then a dull thump from inside, like something heavy shifting against the wall. That's when I decided I'd had enough for one night. I finished my walkthrough and hurried back to the office. I made a note about it in the logbook. Possible animal in C17. Strange noise, investigate further, and left it at that. But the next night, it got worse. Same time, same unit. But now the scratching was louder. And this time, there was something else. Breathing. Not loud, but just enough to be heard if you stood really still. A slow, raspy inhale, like someone sleeping close to the door. I thought I was imagining it, but when I stepped back, I swear I heard a whisper. Just one word. Cole. That's when I started to dread my shift. Every night after that, C17 felt like it was waiting for me. Sometimes the lights near that unit would flicker on and off, even when nothing moved. Sometimes I'd find faint footprints in the dirt near the door, bare footprints. Small, not adult-sized. I reported it, of course. My supervisor brushed it off as some vagrant who might have slipped in. Said maybe a kid got in somehow. But the locks were still sealed, the camera feed showed nothing, and no alarms ever went off. By the 5th night, I started leaving C17 for last. I'd linger by row A or B, stretch out my walk, hoping maybe I could just skip that end of the lot. But eventually, duty forced me back down row C. And every time, the smell was worse. The scratching louder. And now there were knocks. From inside. Sometimes 1. Sometimes 3, slow ones. Once it knocked twice, and then mimicked the rhythm of my own footsteps as I backed away. That was the night I started to believe that whatever was in that unit wasn't just an animal or a person. It was something that knew me now, something that wanted me to come closer. I didn't. Not yet. I didn't tell anyone, but I started keeping a tally in my notebook every time I heard the scratching. Just little hash marks in the margin under C17. I thought maybe I'd see a pattern. Maybe it would stop after a while. But it didn't. If anything, it started happening earlier in the night. And it started lasting longer. One night, just past 1 a.m., I stood outside the unit and counted the seconds between each sound. Scratch, pause, scratch, pause. It was like something inside was pacing, dragging something across the floor. I leaned in close, just a few inches from the metal, and that's when I heard it again. Breathing. This time it wasn't slow and steady. It was shallow, fast, panicked maybe, or excited. I couldn't tell, but it was close, right on the other side of the wall, as if someone had pressed their face against it and was trying not to be heard. That kind of heavy, open-mouthed breath you'd hear when someone's hiding. The metal felt warm. That's what got me. It should have been cold. Everything else was. The air outside was in the low 40s, but the surface of the door felt like it had been sitting in sunlight all day. My hand jerked back without thinking. I stood there for a second, stunned, then did what any sane person would do. I backed away and left. The next night, I brought a small digital thermometer from home and held it against the door of C17. It read 74 degrees Fahrenheit. That might not sound like much, but when everything else around you is freezing and the other unit doors are barely above 40, it doesn't make sense. I even checked the lock. Still sealed. Still rusted. No one had opened that unit in years. The wall was breathing. That's how I started thinking of it. Because the next night, it wasn't just the temperature or the sounds. It was the movement. The metal bulged, just slightly, like something pushed from the inside. Not enough to bend it, but enough to make the flashlight beam waver across the surface. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, or maybe it was the cold messing with my focus. But then I saw the dust. There was a thin line of dust along the edge of the frame. As I watched, it shifted. The seam of the unit expanded, not by much, maybe the width of a nickel, but just enough to make the dust flake and fall like snow. It closed again a second later, snapping shut like someone had taken a deep breath and held it. That's when I realized whatever was inside wasn't just moving, it was alive. Not alive in the way a raccoon is. I mean aware. It had a rhythm, a presence. I told my supervisor again. I said I wanted to check the unit, maybe open it just to be safe. He told me I didn't have the authority. The owner of the unit was still paying. Monthly auto debit. Clean record. No permission. No entry. Just ignore it, he said, like I was complaining about a noisy air vent. Could be old plumbing beneath the floor or heat expansion in the walls. There's no plumbing in row C, and the walls don't breathe. 2 nights later, I brought my phone out and started recording. I walked up to C17 just after 2 a.m. and waited. I held my breath. I could hear the wind, faint cars on the nearby highway, the crunch of gravel under my own boots. Then, the scratching started. It was louder now, and slower, a kind of deliberate drag tap, like someone pulling long nails across wood and then knocking, just once, on the inside of the door. I whispered into the mic, C17. Same time, same pattern, no animals, no visible tampering. Then I heard a second knock, this one right next to my ear. I spun around, thinking maybe someone was playing a joke. The lot was empty. The rows of storage units were quiet and still, lit only by the flickering security lights. But as I turned back to the unit, something brushed against my ankle. It was soft, like fabric. I jumped back, shining my flashlight down, expecting a piece of paper or trash. Nothing, just dirt. But my boot print was gone, smoothed out, erased. I didn't sleep that day. I watched the recording over and over, boosting the audio with some free editing app. In the background, past the wind and static, I heard something I didn't catch the first time. A voice. Faint, barely above a whisper. Let me out. That was it. Just those 3 words, buried under the scratching and static. Let me out. I didn't go back the next night. I called in sick. I stayed home, curtains drawn, lights on, TV playing something dumb just to drown out the silence. But then the phone rang. It was the facility's landline number. I didn't answer, but it left a voicemail. No words, just a long, shaky breath. Then a single knock. I didn't play the rest. I knew that sound. I'd heard it every night for 2 weeks. And somehow, now, it had followed me home. I didn't quit right away. Part of me was still clinging to the idea that I was just tired, or maybe even losing it a little. You tell yourself things like that to stay grounded, because the alternative? That something alive was behind a locked metal wall, whispering into your phone and erasing your footprints. That's harder to live with. But I stopped going near Unit C-17. I avoided Row C entirely. If I had to pass by, I kept my eyes forward and my steps fast. I logged fake maintenance checks just to justify staying near the front office. I kept the radios on full volume, even though the static made the hairs on my neck stand up. And still, it found ways to remind me it hadn't forgotten me. The knocks started showing up in places they shouldn't have. One night, I heard them from inside the break room fridge. Another time, from the supply closet door, 3 soft knocks, like someone politely asking to come out. I'd check, of course. Nothing. Always nothing. But I knew what I heard. Then came the smell. It was subtle at first, like damp wood and iron. Old, stale air. But soon it got worse. Stronger. Like something had died and had been left to rot for weeks behind the drywall. I'd smell it near Row C, sure, but it started seeping into the office too. The boss said maybe there was a dead possum in the crawl space. But he never called pest control. Then came the night that broke me. It was just after 3 a.m., and I was finishing up paperwork at the desk, trying to ignore the lingering sense that someone, or something, was staring at me through the security monitors. I kept glancing at the screens, watching each row flash in and out of view. Most of the cameras were set to motion sensor, so nothing showed unless something moved. But then camera 17 flickered. Row C. It came on for just a second, and in that second, I saw the door of Unit C-17 bow outward. Not open, not shake. It bowed, like someone, or something, was pushing from the inside with force. The metal flexed with a groan I swear I could feel in my teeth. Then it snapped back, and the screen went dark again. No movement detected. I stared at the monitor, breathing hard, and that's when I saw it. A smudge, on the inside of the glass. It looked like a handprint. No, not exactly a hand. The shape was wrong. Too long, too thin, like fingers, but not human. I left that night. I clocked out early, didn't even lock the gate. I just grabbed my jacket, got in my car, and drove. I didn't even realize how hard I was shaking until I missed the turn for my street and had to pull over. That was my last shift. I didn't go back, didn't pick up my check, didn't return calls. I left town for a few weeks, crashed with my brother in Asheville, just trying to get the smell out of my nose and the sound of those knocks out of my head. I've had other jobs since then. Nothing overnight, nothing near storage units. But sometimes, when I'm alone in my apartment, I still hear it. 3 slow knocks. Sometimes it's the closet. Sometimes it's the wall behind the bed. Once, God help me, it came from under the floorboards. I moved twice. It followed me. I tried recording it once. I sat up with my phone ready. I waited in the dark until the knocking came again. I played it back the next morning, hoping to prove to myself that I wasn't imagining it. The audio file was empty, just dead silence. Except, right at the very end, barely audible unless you crank the volume. A voice. A whisper. You heard me. Now I keep the lights on at night. I sleep with white noise on full blast. I don't open locked doors that weren't mine to begin with. And I never ignore that feeling in your gut when it tells you to leave. Because sometimes, there really is something scratching from the other side of the wall. And sometimes, it's not trying to get out. It's waiting for you to come closer.